No mai, haere mai, ki tēnei hui. As I said this morning, it's, I think, by legislation banned from saying Happy New Year when it's February. So instead we're saying it's nice to see you in 2025. I just want to note before, obviously we've got some, a fairly intense afternoon of back-to-back briefings, and I just want to acknowledge that we have done that and kept tomorrow afternoon free to enable those, as many of us as choose to go to the memorial service. So just to sort of acknowledge that, and that we can get through an afternoon and we'll just have little tiny breaks as required. But this first session is a little one, and just half an hour. And what we are going to do, and you've all got the slides now, and actually we can have. Depending on, there may be time for a few questions this afternoon, but if not, we've got another session tomorrow, which is going to enable your questions. So welcome, and I'd like to pass over to Michael and Vincent for the session. Thank you. And to note, all of these sessions this afternoon are public and live streamed.
Kia ora, councillors. Welcome to February. And today we are basically continuing on the journey on the rating valuations. As at late Friday, we got the approval from the Office of the Valuer General around the valuations, and this is really what we're going to be talking about today. Today is specifically focused on the rating implications and what it means across the ratepayers, commercial, residential, and to some extent and rural as well. And to some extent, we'll touch on the suburbs, but it's mainly just to give you a good overview of what the results of the rating valuations mean, the rating implications, and what it means in terms of the pie. As Councillor Matthews mentioned earlier, there will be time tomorrow, because we're conscious that we've just given you the slides today. There will be time, a whole hour session, to go through detailed questions, answer any specific questions around the valuations themselves. And if we finish early, we might also have just time for one or two questions. But yeah. So the first slide is was just really talking through the timeline, and at the start of the valuation process, we did talk about what the key drivers were going to be across the city. We're expecting a lot of the residential properties to decrease quite significantly, particularly the capital values. That was mainly around reduction in demand for properties and inner city development that had buoyed the market in 2021. So all of that slowed down, so we're expecting a lot of the residential properties to come down, and we'd put in an estimate in the last presentation of about between 20 to 25. A lot of that has come to pass, and some suburbs have decreased a little bit more, some have decreased a little bit less, depending on the quality of the properties that were available. In November, the Office of the Valuer General did the audit, and we had a bit of a hiccup in December, where they had asked for more information. And this was really around areas where there weren't a lot of sales, and there were lots of questions around secondary evidence that they needed that QV worked through with the Valuer General. And thankfully on Friday, we had got that across the line. So what that means is early February, which is hopefully tomorrow, the QV valuation results will be up on their website, and there'll be something up also on Property Search so that ratepayers can have a look at what it means for their properties. And there'll also be circulation of the valuation notices starting next week, just after Hui-tanguru weekend, and people can then get their valuation notices starting next week. Going forward, we're going to talk about the pie a little bit, and rating valuations and what they are used for. I know we've talked about it throughout the whole valuation, but we just thought would re-emphasize a couple of key things and how it all fits into the ratepayers' invoices and the rate assessments at the end of the year, starting the next rating year. So the rating valuations are predominantly used to calculate the rating base and the proportion of each rate that the ratepayer pays. The key thing that determines the value that goes to the key thing that we look at in terms of the calculation is the rates requirement, and that is really driven by the budgets and the costs and what it takes to run the city. That's then divided by the total rating base to get our rates in the dollar. And that, if you remember from the rate setting process in May, June, the rates in the dollar is what you set and the council makes a decision on. Again, determined based on the rates requirement, the rating base, which is the capital value of the city, remains the same, and it will remain the same for the next 3 years. The capital value of the respective property is then multiplied by that rates in the dollar, and that's when ratepayers get and see their rates invoice. A decrease in capital value or a decrease or an increase in capital value doesn't change that first circle, which is the rates requirement. That will always remain the same. What changes is the proportion that each ratepayer then pays and contributes towards the city. And that's one key fundamental that we wanted to just re-emphasize as we go through this process. It is how we slice the pie that we're talking about. It's not necessarily how big the pie is. And we'll be working through that as well. So just to recap a few messages key things that we're talking about through the rating revaluation. A lot of the things we've talked about before. The rates are assessed every 3 years. The rating valuations are assessed every 3 years. So what we have now is going to remain for the next 3 years. And it is not a reflection of what the market is, but it's a reflection of how we divvy up the rates pie. The rates values are assessed independently by QV, so that is not done internally by us. They are the valuation experts in this process, and that process is audited by the Office of the Valuer General. If they're genuinely uncomfortable with the process, we'll experience a situation like what we did in December, where they ask more questions, want more information, and we can either get hopefully, we never see it before, a red light, but it can get to that extreme when they are uncomfortable with values. We got a bit of a slow down, please, can we get more information? And we got that across the line. And again, just to re-emphasize, rating valuations determine how we slice the pie, how we divvy up across the city, across suburbs, across individuals. And there will be variations to that within each sector, within each suburb, and within each area as well. So there will be pluses and minuses across the board. Yeah, again, just to re-emphasize, the size of the pie is determined through the long-term planning process and the annual planning process that we're going through right now. So that will determine how much we're going to divvy up, and the rating valuations will just be that, how we cut that pie across the board. The proportionate change in a property will determine how that pie is sliced. So some ratepayers will experience a situation where if the value of the property decreases to a magnitude that's higher than the decrease that the average city, they are likely to get a rates decrease, or they will get an increase that's less than everyone else. The reverse is also true. So if your property has retained a lot of its value, so between 2021 and 2024, that decrease isn't as much as the city average, they're likely to get rates increases. And at the start of the revaluation process, we did highlight that a lot of the industrial and commercial properties might sit in that space. And as we've gone through the rating valuation process, there are specific other type of properties that didn't have a decrease in value, and we'll be touching on those as we go along. The rating values will be used for the next 3 years. Again, that will be fixed for that period. And ratepayers do have the opportunity to object. And they can go through their property valuation and highlight the concerns that they have in the valuation that's been placed. And there will be a process around that, and there is additional information on how best to handle that objection process. And they will have a lengthy time to work through that objection process as well. And we'll talk through that as we go. So subsequent market changes won't change the rating valuations until the next valuation. And just to re-emphasize the point, rating valuations are, whilst they look at the market, they aren't necessarily market valuations. So where there are ratepayers who have concerns that maybe they want to sell their house later on, would strongly encourage them just to approach property valuers and not necessarily rely on the rating valuations, because rating valuations are only used for how we cut the pie. All right. As we get into the nitty-gritty of it all, so the overview of our results, basically the capital values for the entire city decreased by 21%. Whilst most suburbs shifted in line with the average, there were a number that shifted either above or below that city average. You've got residential properties coming down by about 24.1%. You've got rural and lifestyle properties coming down by 11.12%. And that's really, the rural properties is really because they retained a lot of their values, and we're also looking at the lifestyle blocks as well in that space. So they retained a lot of their values. The commercial properties came down on average by 21%. And the utilities, which is predominantly the pipes that the city owns, those went up. And they went up in value pretty much to mirror the valuations that are existing within our financial records. So in short, it's a timing thing. The valuations on our pipes, we do them every 2 years. And in there's a bit of a gap where the value in our books is higher than the red, and this is just us recognizing and capturing that in that process. There has been a shift in terms of the ratio of how much the commercial sector and the residential sector will contribute. Before, the ratio was 56% was what the residential ratepayers would contribute, and 44% was what the commercial ratepayers will contribute. As a result of those shifts in the rating valuations, where the commercial sector didn't decrease as much as the residential, they are now paying a lot more, and a lot of that increase is sitting in the utilities and specifically council-owned assets that we have within the process. And we're just going to dive into what it means for us, Wellington City Council now. Wellington City Council, as a ratepayer, is the largest ratepayer within the city, paying for all the rateable properties that we own. Utilities is the biggest contribution, and we've got a lot of properties as well. As I mentioned earlier, utilities had a significant increase in capital values. This represents a significant change from the valuations from 2021 to 2024. Whilst these changes have been recognized within the financial statements through previous asset valuations, they are now being recognized in the rating database, as I mentioned earlier. The overall impact of the shift in valuations on utilities and some of the properties that the council owns means that there's an additional cost pressure of about 16.5 million that the city will start contributing over and above what other ratepayers will be contributing. As noted previously, the valuation of utilities increased quite a bit, and that's shifted that contribution. The 16.5 million that we're talking about here is both the Wellington City Council contributions towards rates, as well as the implication on Greater Wellington rates. The key thing that will be talked about in previous presentations is how we fund that and how we're going to be looking at that. We're trying to make sure that we're not going to pass that cost pressure onto ratepayers, and there's some specific advice that the next team is going to be working through, and they'll talk you through how that's going to work through. We talked about how it impacts the sectors, how it impacts different suburbs. This is a picture depiction of what it looks like for the ratepayers. Like I had mentioned before, there will be ratepayers that will have an increase that is lower than others. What we tried to do was to identify where our outliers will be sitting. And whilst we have 19% of ratepayers who will see an increase that is 4% or below, some might actually experience decreases in their rates. On the other side of it, we also have 10% of ratepayers across the city that have increases that are greater than 16%. All of those will sit within the average rates increase that we're proposing, but this is the magnitude of what the outliers look like in those respective places. It's also important to note 10%. That 10% that's going to experience increases greater than 16% is made up a whole host of properties, particularly properties that retained as much value as they could, which is your higher quality assets. You also have a good number of those being inner city parking lots, which have got separate title. So about 20% of that just relates to parking spaces that retained a lot of their value that will have increases that are greater than 16%. What we've tried to do is just QV has also got their deck in there, so you'll have a lot more detail around the rates distribution by suburb for land values and capital values. But what we tried to depict there was just where the capital value is sitting and where the percentage decreases are sitting across the suburbs. As I highlighted earlier, you'll have suburbs like Northland, where they had decreases that were significantly higher than the average decrease of 24.4% for residential. So most of those properties within those suburbs are gonna experience a decrease. Within the suburbs itself, there would be a range, so there will be some that will experience increases and there will be some that will experience decreases. And you'll be able to find that percentage and that proportion in Annexure 2, which is probably the last slide on your pack, where we've done that by suburb all the way through, and how that will fit across the suburbs. We talked a lot, I'd mentioned a lot about the rural and livestock blocks not decreasing, and that's really because it retained a lot of their value. And this is made up of places like Oharehu, Makara Beach as well, Horokiwi, and Takapu Valley. On the other side of it, you also have suburbs like Breaker Bay, Strathmore, Northland that had significant decreases. That's just reflecting the decrease in value due to reduction in inner city development. So that's we weren't seeing a lot of that activity of having apartment blocks or subdivisions in those spaces, and that development had slowed down quite a bit, and that's just reflective of a lot of that. There are a lot of ratepayers that are sitting within the left and the right, but when I say the left and the right, the significant decreases and the significant increases, but all in all, on average, they are within QE. A lot of the residential ratepayers will have an average increase of around 12%, but a lot of that is going to be talked about with the team on the average rates increase as well. And there will be some in the commercial space that will have that average increase of 6%. In terms of objections, we'd strongly recommend that people do look at the evaluation notices, do take time to go through it and understand what that value means for you. And if you have instances where you've got questions that you want to ask specifically around the valuation, please do contact QV, and they will be happy to work through the values with you or with the ratepayers. The objection process is you can object online, so there is a portal that's there. You can object through QV on their website. Would strongly encourage that as the preferred method of doing things. That way we don't have a lot of things where people try to post in, and things get lost as they are in transit. The time frame for the objections will close on the 31st of March. Whilst the statutory period gives us a minimum, we've opted to extend that minimum to allow ratepayers to engage with the process and go through the valuation. So the valuation notices will go out next week. That will give ratepayers on average between 8 to 10 weeks to go through their evaluations, object through the process, and work through that. The objections will be processed from April onwards, so they will be getting feedback on that process, and we'll work through that as well in terms of what it then means as we go through the annual plan process and the rate setting process. As mentioned earlier, rating valuations will be visible to the public on the Wellington City Council property search. That's probably going to be later by end of day tomorrow. And QVE will have it up on their website tomorrow as well. So ratepayers can either go to the QVE website or they can come to Wellington City Council website. And if either one doesn't have the information, please do go to the other one, and that information will be available. As part of the efforts throughout the evaluation process, we did mention that we're going to try and communicate as much as we can to ratepayers, and to some extent, we'll try to over-communicate. With that in mind, we will be sending letters out to ratepayers on the outcome of the rating valuations, what it means for them, and where they sit in that proportionate change and proportionate movement perspective. They will get their valuation notices, and they will also have that opportunity to object. Within the letters that will be circulated will include that objection process. Theoretically, what will also include what they definitely need to have in there for, I would like to say successful objections, but for the objections to be robust enough for QV to be able to work through and to get back to them without necessarily a lot of toing and froing. The rating valuation notices, like I mentioned, will be circulated starting next week after the Waitangi weekend, and the ratepayers will have that opportunity to object until the 31st of March. The rating distribution that we've shared with you today is very indicative, and that will be dependent on the changes that the council makes around the budget process and the budgets for 2025-26. And the implications of those decisions will be modeled as we go along throughout the annual planning process, right up until you set the rates for next year. And with that in mind,
I have a couple of questions now, so it seems like we might have time for those, Michael. So the first one, Councillor Young online, I believe you have your hand up.
I do. So looking at the sort of roughly 25% decrease in property values, does this mean that our rates increase will have to be even higher?
No.
Because of the reduced income from the houses?
No, that's it. The distribution is what we're talking about. So the size of the pie, i.e. what we require, won't change. It just means that with the decrease, there will be some ratepayers who will contribute more, and some ratepayers will contribute less.
That's the point I was making.
Yeah.
So some people will find that they will be paying more than they had currently expected.
Yeah.
Because of the increase in values.
Yeah, because of the decrease, yes.
As there is in every evaluation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rating valuation.
Thank you.
Yeah, depending on how they their valuations compare to the average. Councillor Free.
Yes, I'm just thinking about the commercial versus residential split, and with more commercial value, have we thought at all about changing the differential?
I can answer. There was that conversation of looking at the differential, and the main reason why we didn't change the differential is because that 16.5 million represents about 3%. So that 3% is solely being absorbed by the council. It's not being passed on to other commercial ratepayers.
Okay.
It's solely being absorbed by the council. So with that in mind, we didn't think changing the differential was appropriate, because that would mean that you then pass more on to, so if you moved it to the left,
yes,
residential,
I understand. But can we convey that to the, because I know it's a sensitive topic for our businesses, so can we actually convey that reasoning
Yes,
Thank you.
that
As
will
part
be
of the
there, and we will also be continuously talking about it. And the team that's going to come behind me will probably re-emphasize the same thing around. That's the reason why we didn't think changing the differential was appropriate.
And can I just ask about the number of commercial units? Has that gone up or down?
We'll have to look at that in a bit more detail.
I'd be interested
Apologies.
in the answer to that. Thanks.
Yeah.
And just because some councillors arrived late, we have got a session tomorrow. So if you have more questions, we can go through those tomorrow. Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. You said that council's got an increase of 16.5 million in extra rates. How much does it pay in total?
I'll just double check that, and please don't hold
Oh, no,
a
that's
gun
all right.
to
I'm
my
just
head
trying
right
to
now. But I think
yeah.
it should be just about 12 million at the moment, so it'll go up to about 30. But we can come back to you with an exact number.
Okay. Also, what does the 3% relate to that you talked about just before to answering Councillor Freeze?
So it is the utilities. So our utilities are our pipes. So
Yeah.
those had a valuation increase, whilst the average city went down. So that means those assets will contribute significantly more to the rates than everyone else within the city.
Okay, all right, thank you. So you're still going to keep it the differential 3.7,
Yes.
even though the proportion has changed?
Yes, and that's because that proportion is really being absorbed by Wellington City Council.
That's
Okay, thank you.
That's a recommendation that will need to come to you, councillors, as part of the decision making next week. But as Michael noted, they'll cover that off either in the briefing next, or it'll be covered in the paper for next week.
Councillor Randall.
Thank you. Just for clarification, you talked about the changes for different properties for rates. We've also got the sludge treatment plant levy. Do these valuation changes affect the levy that's to be paid?
Yes, it will also have an impact on the levy in terms of how they contribute. The overarching message there would be the ratio that commercials and residential pay will be the same. So residentials already contribute 75% and commercials contribute 25%. That ratio will be maintained, but within that, there might be different variations depending on how the value moves.
Okay, so that means that when you talk about
Sorry, could you? I should have said when Councillor Cover. If you could ask your questions through me, as I have one more.
Sorry.
More. I should have. I'll let you go quick. Yeah, great.
so just more to clarify, you talked about an average of 16%, but in fact, if you include the levy, the actual average is higher than that, and that's affected?
Oh, the 16 that I was talking about is the $16 million cost pressure on utilities only. The average rates increase that the team behind that will come after us is, I think that's about 12.45.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just one more question.
We've got Q&A tomorrow. Yes, yes, go quickly. One more.
So just in terms of the $16.5 million rates contribution that the City Council will need to find, will that affect the amount of rates that we've got to take in order to fund our own rates?
We'll cover that off in the next session,
Okay, thank you.
and what our proposals are for that.
All right. I think what we'll do, we'll take just a very brief micro pause. Thank you both, and we'll have further questions tomorrow. And we will change the live stream over to the next session, which is the annual plan briefing.